It's 3.2 kilometers long, 28 meters wide, and costs over $300 million. The Chinese-built Kigongo-Busisi Bridge, said to be the longest in East Africa, is nearing completion.
Development is a process. It's possible that you hear of developments in one area and you haven't been reached. But I want to assure you that each part of the country will be reached. We swore to serve the people, and that's what we're doing.
Despite its progress, the project, which has been under construction for the past 6 years, faced significant delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The government now says that the bridge will be ready by February next year, opening a new chapter in regional infrastructure and economic opportunities for East Africans.
That's what Ethiopia is calling it. This is a rugged, landlocked country located in East Africa, the Horn of Africa, and it is mired in conflict. But now Ethiopia has united to celebrate. It is all set to inaugurate GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. As the name suggests, this is a dam towering 145 meters high and stretching nearly 2 kilometers. Its reservoir is roughly the size of Greater London, or about double the size of Singapore. GERD is one of the biggest dams in the world and the biggest hydroelectric plant in Africa. It has been under construction for more than a decade now, costing Ethiopia a whopping $5 billion. It was built entirely with Ethiopian money, no foreign loans, no international aid, just people and the government funding the project. And tomorrow, Ethiopia will throw the switch.
Something massive is happening right now across Africa, something Washington never saw coming. For years, Africa has been described as the future, but that future has now arrived. A new $1 trillion infrastructure plan is already transforming the continent, and this time, it's not being led by the West. It's being built by Africa, for Africa. High-speed railways are connecting countries that were once divided by poor transport. Massive ports are opening on coastlines that used to depend on Western shipping routes. Power plants, fiber optic cables, and cross-border highways are linking economies faster than anyone predicted. And for the first time in modern history, Africa controls the blueprint. Washington is paying attention, because this isn't just about development, it's about control of global trade. For over a century, Western nations built the systems that shaped how goods, money, and influence moved. Africa supplied the raw materials, while the West handled production and profit. But that balance is shifting. This new $1 trillion plan could redirect trade routes, supply chains, and digital infrastructure away from Western control. That's why U.S. policymakers are watching nervously. They know that whoever builds the infrastructure controls the future economy. Over the last few years, Africa's economic alliances have quietly evolved. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, created a single market of over 1.4 billion people, the largest in the world by population. It's designed to boost trade between African nations instead of relying on exports to Europe or the United States. Now, with this $1 trillion infrastructure project, the AFCFTA finally has the roads, ports, and power grids to make that vision real. In short, Africa is building the foundation of its own global power system. Here's why that matters. Every superpower in history, from the British Empire to the United States, was built on infrastructure. Railroads built America. Shipping routes built Europe's empires. And now, Africa is building its own network that no one outside the continent can control. If it succeeds, trade between African nations could increase by more than 50% in the next decade. Foreign companies will have to compete with African firms on African soil. And the old dependency model, where the West extracts and Africa supplies, could collapse for good. That's what has Washington worried. Already, the signs are visible. Nigeria's new Lekki deep sea port, one of the biggest in West Africa, is handling massive trade volumes. Kenya's modern rail systems are cutting travel time between major cities from days to hours. Egypt is building an entirely new capital with state-of-the-art, smart technology. Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam is powering millions of homes across East Africa. All these projects are part of a much bigger strategy. Connect the entire continent, remove Western bottlenecks, and unlock Africa's economic independence. But the biggest shift isn't physical, it's financial. Instead of relying solely on Western loans or aid, African nations are pooling resources, attracting private investment, and negotiating directly with global partners on their own terms. The African Development Bank, the African Export-Import Bank, and new BRICS financing models are replacing old systems once dominated by Washington and Brussels. That's why Western analysts are calling this a geopolitical earthquake. Because once Africa controls its financing and infrastructure, it also controls its economic destiny. For the United States, this comes at a difficult time. Its own infrastructure is aging, domestic spending is stretched, and global influence is fading. At the same time, China, Russia, and the Gulf states are deepening partnerships with African nations, not as aid donors, but as equals in trade and technology. That means Africa now has multiple options and no longer depends on any single power. This independence is exactly what Western policymakers have always feared: a self-sufficient Africa, united economically, and capable of setting its own global terms. But there's something even more symbolic about this moment. For decades, the narrative around Africa has been about poverty, instability, and aid. Now, the conversation has changed. The world's fastest-growing cities are in Africa. The youngest and most dynamic workforce on Earth is in Africa. And the infrastructure being built today, the ports, data centers, and industrial zones, will define how the next century operates. This isn't a regional shift. It's a global one. So when Washington looks at Africa's $1 trillion plan, it sees more than just construction. It sees competition. It sees a continent that no longer fits into the role it once played. And it sees the beginning of a power transition that could reshape the global economy forever. Because the truth is, Africa's rise doesn't need permission anymore. It's already happening. The ports are open. The roads are under construction. The trade routes are shifting. And the next generation of African entrepreneurs and engineers is taking the lead. The West can't stop it, only adapt to it. So what happens next? The trillion-dollar plan isn't just about growth. It's about strategy, building a continent-wide system that connects Africa's resources to African industries, African cities to African markets, and African innovation to global influence. This is Africa's version of the Industrial Revolution, and it's unfolding right now. By the time most of the world realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to catch up. Because once the infrastructure is in place, the flow of power, economic and political, will never be the same again. The world woke up to a headline that stunned financial analysts and political observers alike. Africa has just launched a $1 trillion infrastructure plan. For decades, the narrative surrounding Africa has been one of potential, vast resources, young population, and untapped markets. But potential alone doesn't shift global power. What's happening now is different. This time, Africa isn't just talking about development. It's financing, building, and connecting an entire continent in a coordinated push that could redefine global trade. At the heart of this transformation is a continent-wide blueprint: railways spanning from Cairo to Cape Town, highways linking inland nations to deepwater ports, and new energy grids that can supply entire regions. It's not just about construction, it's about power. Economic power. The kind that challenges old hierarchies and reshapes global influence. For Washington, this move didn't just come as a surprise, it came as a warning. Because this isn't just an economic project, it's a geopolitical statement. Africa is saying to the world, we are no longer waiting for permission to grow. But who's funding this trillion-dollar move? The answer is complex, and it's what makes this story so powerful. To understand Africa's $1 trillion plan, we have to look at who's driving it. Across the continent, governments are pooling resources through the African Union, Afreximbank, and partnerships with Asian and Middle Eastern investors. China remains a key player, not just lending money, but helping design and execute megaprojects. Yet this time, African nations are setting their own terms. The African Development Bank recently confirmed record-high funding for infrastructure projects, while nations like Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt are establishing sovereign wealth funds to co-finance long-term projects. It's a shift in mindset. Africa no longer wants aid, it wants equity. Take Kenya's new port at Lamu, part of the Lapset Corridor, or Nigeria's multi-billion-dollar Dangote refinery, one of the largest in the world. In Ethiopia, new industrial zones are connecting with rail lines that stretch across borders. In Egypt, new smart cities rise from the desert with infrastructure rivaling Western capitals. Each of these projects feeds into one thing: independence. For decades, Africa's biggest weakness wasn't resources or talent, it was dependency. Today, that dependency is fading fast. And while Washington debates how to rebuild its own infrastructure, Africa is building highways, energy corridors, and digital fiber networks that will define the next century. Africa isn't just building roads and ports, it's powering them. From Morocco's massive solar farms to Kenya's geothermal plants, the continent is leapfrogging fossil fuel models and heading straight into the renewable age. The irony is that Africa, which contributed the least to global carbon emissions, may soon become the world's cleanest energy producer. But this energy pivot isn't just about going green. It's strategic. By developing its own energy grid, Africa reduces its reliance on imported oil and gas, while positioning itself as a global supplier of critical minerals and green hydrogen. This is where Washington's concern grows. The same lithium, cobalt, and rare earths that power U.S. and European industries are now being processed and traded through African alliances, not through Western corporations. It's not just about sustainability, it's about leverage. For the first time in modern history, Africa holds cards that global superpowers can't ignore.